Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all sins and commandments alike. This is Griever, your host as always, bringing you guys episode 10 of Nanatsu no Taizai's newest season. Now, here at episode 10, we start off showing I finally got a feel for what these characters are and what they're going to be, and it's very unfortunate because a lot of the good diversity in this series is all the different magical abilities. It's not just about the seven sins and the Ten Commandments. There are a multitude of other characters. You have King Arthur, you have Hauser, Gilthunder, Hendrickson, Dreyfus. You have all these other characters that influx Jericho, that add more dynamic. They add more abilities, more magical power, just more a vast array of different potential characters. It's really nice to see, but during this opening part here, right before we get the theme song and jump over to Bon and Jericho with the Beastman, here is very reminiscent to me of the first season was Dragon Ball, and or the first season of Seven Deadly Sins. That was more the Saiyan arc, if you will. And for those of you who don't know Dragon Ball, what happens to a multitude of the characters, being Chaozu, Tien, Yamcha, really Krillin for the most part, and stuff like that, is that even though they were contenders, back in the first couple of movies and throughout Dragon Ball and the first season of Dragon Ball Z, they eventually just fell to the wayside. They could never catch up, and even though they gave them training and power boosts, and they were just one step sort of deal behind the main characters, being Goku and stuff like that, and Piccolo and Gohan, they eventually just fell to the wayside. Eventually, they just could not contend anymore, and I feel like after watching this training sequence, that it's very unfortunate because it seems to me that, Gilthunder and Hauser, who were contenders, actual contenders back, in the first season sort of deal, now are starting to fall to the wayside, and I don't believe they get enough credit and enough of a power boost from this training. They all pair off. Same with people like Slater and stuff, and King Arthur, they go in, and we know King Arthur is eventually going to have a pivotal role, but the other ones just seem to kind of like where's their due. They kind of deserve a little something, especially Gil being at the forefront of the first season, being one of the main antagonists and being able to fight against sins at that type of level. He's supposed to be one of the stronger holy knights, and he's so far just being pushed to the side. Now, how they'll handle this in the anime might be a little different than how they handle it in the manga. But for right now, it feels like we're having another Tien, Yamcha, Chaozu, Krillin sort of thing going on with these characters, rather than actually utilizing them and their strengths and weaknesses and giving them honest power boosts. They don't need to be as strong as the main characters. I don't need to see Gilthunder or Hauser go up against one of the main villains and actually go toe-to-toe, but I would like to see that, if you had the three of them, if you had Hendrickson lead the three, Griever, Hauser, and Gilthunder against, I don't know, maybe Lieutenant, or maybe one of the weaker of the commandments, they might be able to hold them back or something. That would just give them a little more credit, rather than just being, kind of fodder for the most part. And I don't like using the word scrubs, and I don't want them to be scrubs. I just don't want them to be fodder characters. So I'm hoping that this is not what's going to happen. It might be a little reminiscent. Maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but I do hope that doesn't happen. Now, after this, we jump into Bon and his backstory, because, they have the werefox in the bed here, and him and Jericho are talking to him all about, having, living a kind of a shady life, and he actually has two sons and all this stuff, and this is where we jump into Bon's backstory. We see that, of course, at the end of the last episode, he met a guy in jail named Zhivago. Now, is this reminiscent of Dr. Zhivago, the movie? I only saw part of that movie, so I don't know if there's any key references to the character from the movie to the current character, or if it's just a name choice or something like that. Not really sure, but this does add, I really like this part. This was done properly. Now I know it's very reminiscent of an OVA from a manga, and that's what it is. It pretty much goes scene by scene. However, I felt like whereas should have elaborated, as I ranted about in the last episode review, this one they did not. They didn't stretch it, but they didn't shorten it by any stretch. We had the good monologuing of Zhivago going through, and Bon, and just learning. He learned how to steal. We learned that his parents are no longer around, that he's being treated like shit and stuff. And there's even an instance where a couple of shady folk try to get him into a barrel and sell him to a noblewoman who collects children. Now, at first I was sitting there thinking, I'm going, okay, yeah, but he's just going to run away. Like, what the hell's the point in selling, someone who's fond of children? And then it says, oh, but they're tortured and killed eventually. That's why she needs so many. I'm like, fuck, that's the reason. So, Bond's, scared. He's in the barrel. He's trying to break out. And eventually, Zhivago and Bond meet up again because he robbed the caravan of which he was being, transported to be sold. Now, is this chance? I like to think that Zhivago knew where Bond was. At this point they aren't very, very close yet, but I tend to believe that Zhivago did know that Bond was in the barrel, and he plays it off as, no, I was just robbing the caravan sort of thing. We go through a few more scenes here of just them learning, him giving him food and teaching him that he shouldn't be calling everyone a piece of shit and should learn words like thank you and please and try to talk like a normal person. Finds out that of course his parents are not part of the equation or anything like that, and eventually Bond asks him to learn how to steal. And this is where we see a bunch of scenes where they start stealing food and gold and goods from people, and they're pulling jobs all the time. Now, they have this little hideout with a little fire going, and we see a lot of nice scenes where Bond says, I'll trust you, Zhivago, when he says don't trust humans, or when he talks about, his other son, Therian and stuff, and you can see Bond gets a little, jealous or envious that Zhivago has a son that he cares about and stuff, and Bond doesn't have that, and he looks up to Zhivago. But then Zhivago brings up the fact that he just says, my other son, however, is this unruly kid named Bond, sort of thing. And Bond doesn't say anything, but you see a nice smile on his face. Zhivago has basically become his stepfather by proxy, and has no problem with that. He looks after him. It's very touching. It's really nice. I love the character of Zhivago. I just wish he was in the series more. Now, we do end up seeing that he's going to pull a job. He's going to pull a big job tomorrow at an estate, a mansion, something like that. Now, Bond goes there early, or I should say that Zhivago gets there late. So he waits around and says, where's Zhivago? And then Bond gets greedy and decides he wants to get praised by Zhivago, and wants to make him impressed. So he figures he's good enough now to do the job on his own. Well, we know how that doesn't end well. That does not end well for Bond. And we see that Zhivago runs to the streets and he overslept, and then he jumps up onto the wall and sees Bond being beaten, black and blue by the guards or the people from the estate or whatever. And intruder, you're stealing, little thief. And I mean, in this time, you could easily, we've seen him being beaten to the point where he puked on the floor. He's not fed properly. There's only so much in this day and age, especially in this series. He will be killed. They will beat him until they don't have any reservations about killing the child of a street rat sort of idea. It's very, very. It's kind of freaky. It's kind of like, okay, Bond's not immortal at this point. I mean, we know he's alive, up to this point, but this is kind of, and then we see Zhivago, jump on the wall about to save him, and then you see the hunting party for a werefox child. And this is where we kind of go, okay, all right. So, we saw a little flash of his son before, and we went, okay, that's a werefox. So now we kind of, the pieces are kind of flowing together now, who Zhivago really is. Now, this is where he makes a choice, and this was very well animated. It was smaller panels in the manga, but right here, this was really good. These full close-up shots of Zhivago, like his eyes, and just really spot on with the whole, grinding his teeth and the sweat pouring down instantly and his eyes widening, not knowing what to do, and then eventually he transforms, and books it back to, he abandons Bon and books it towards his real son Tharion. Now, of course, tragedy ensues. This is almost becoming like One Piece. It really is. Like, all the main Straw Hats have a sad backstory sort of idea. The Seven Deadly Sins appear to have the same thing here. I mean, it's, Deanne didn't have, Matrona died and stuff like that we saw. King, abandoned the Fairy King's forest, and then his best friend died, his sister died, the Fairy King's forest was burnt to the ground originally, and now Bon, who has now suffered from being a street rat and stuff, and all these terrible things that happened to, his family's dead, and now his stepfather abandoned him and all this stuff. And then we see that even though he did make it, he didn't make it in time. He wasn't faster than the hunting party. So I'm under the impression that those people right there were talking about hunters. There was already a hunting party on their way to the cave, because otherwise he would have caught them. There's no way the people that were talking in the alley would have made it past him transforming into a werefox. I'm under the impression that there was already a party, and these were late party goers just to, sort of join and collect in on the spoils, or perhaps just talking about it. I mean, they were holding spears and stuff, if I remember correctly, but they might not have been the actual hunting party. That being said, we see that he's holding his dying son in his arms, and he seemed to have slaughtered the hunting party there, but little Tharion is bloody and beaten and is dying, but he's alive long enough to know that his father came to save him, and, Daddy, you saved me, you came for me, and stuff. And now, so Tharion here, dies, and now Zhivago is, well, fuck. He's had a shitty life because he is a werefox, of course. There's always that prejudice. You always introduce something like that. I mean, it's very reminiscent of Fire Emblem with the Lagoos. All of a sudden, they're treated badly just because they are. Just because they're different. It's the same thing. Gundam Seed has coordinators and naturals. They hate each other. It's so easy to add elements of racism into a show once you have different races, because that is to look at the real world. There's still tons of racism, even in it doesn't matter if you're a third world country or a first world country, racism still exists. It might be better than what it was, but it's still here. It's still there. There's still people with the wrong way of thinking. There's still people with the right way of thinking, but it doesn't matter. It still exists. And so this adds a level of depth to the world we have been engrossed in. It adds a certain level of understanding. I mean, even things like One Piece and stuff add that aspect. Bleach added it. I don't know about Naruto, but basically, usually you can make a world feel much more real and vibrant when you have good world building, good structure, but also realism in your story. Not all these races would get along. No, a bunch of humans wouldn't accept a giant just because they're a giant. They're like, oh, well, you can't help it. You're just super strong. That's no big deal. You're just big. No, of course that's not how it would work. People would be afraid. People would be scared, People are scared of magic. I mean, it's just part of the way the world is. So this adds a really good element that we've not seen. Now, the whole Beastman thing, yeah. I really want them to bring back some Beastmen, because this is our introduction to the Beastmen. A werefox, okay. So are there werewolves, weredogs, werecats, werelephants, where are more of even werefoxes? And I don't recall, at least as far as I am aware, of there really being much of the way of more of them introduced in the series. And that to me kind of goes, okay. I can understand why, because of course they're hated by most other races, I'm assuming, and so they're scavengers. They hide in caves and such like that. Zhivago being the exception, who transformed and would steal so he could survive. Now, this is once again so sad, because we jump back, of course, to Bon and Jericho and Zhivago in the bed, and now Bon starts talking to Zhivago about this and said, it wasn't your fault. And he said, I'm a worthless scumbag. I'm the worthless piece of shit. Had I made the right choice back then, I wouldn't have lost everything. I had two sons, one to save, and one I could have easily saved, and one I chose to run and try to save. And I couldn't even save that one, and this one. I don't believe they bring up the line here. In the manga they do, and this is one change. because Jericho implies, it says, well, what did happen to your other son? Because, of course, she does not know that it's young Bond at this point. And says, listen, like, what happened? Like, did you go back to see if you could find your other son? And he was too afraid. That was the line. He goes, I was too afraid to find out. I had just lost my own flesh and blood. I had also betrayed. I was too much of a coward, and I couldn't deal with it. He's not sure if Bond was alive or dead at this point, but he couldn't bring himself to go back to that town and try to find out if Bond was alive. Of course, this adds more tragedy to the story because, as we know, Bond somehow did survive. He might have been beaten black and blue, but he did manage to survive. And, of course, the skills that Zhivago had taught him, now he was a capable thief. Maybe not of the level of stealing from an estate like that as a small child, but he was able to get himself enough food and stuff and steal enough to sustain himself. So there is that little tidbit there. They don't really go into detail about what happened after this to Bond, but Bond just says, it wasn't your fault. Had you, and Zhivago says, well, what the hell do you know? And he said, well, listen, had you saved me and turned your back on your real son, I never would have forgiven you. But you were my ideal father. I never thought you betrayed me once. You did what you thought was right. Like, I was your adoptive son. Really, like Bond does not hold a grudge that he would try to save his own child first, and Bond, it wasn't about a difference of love or anything like that. It was simply he had to make a choice, and now Zhivago regrets making the wrong choice. Now, Bond says, like, it's not the wrong choice. You tried to save your own son. If you had come back to save me and let your own son die, I never would have forgiven you, because you never would have forgiven yourself for not trying. And this is where Zhivago realizes that's his son, it's Bond. And so he, starts welling up with tears, and he grabs a hold of Bond and says, when did you grow up so damn much, sort of idea. And nice tender moments like this. As I said, I've been talking about this for how long now? Probably about 10, 12 minutes by the looks of the timer here. This was just really well done. Perfectly paced, no problem. Animation was good. I was happy because I like Bond as a character. Bond is definitely a bigger fan favorite looking at the current polls. A lot of people like Bond. We're hoping for him to come back soon. The only complaint people have about Bond in the current manga is that people just want more of him. They just want to see more Bond. Now, this being said, we jump over from all this stuff and we don't continue the Bond story yet. So I'm kind of like, okay, I wanted to kind of tie this up in a neat little bow. But yeah, we don't get that. Of course, we have to jump over to the training. Now, during this training, we see that it's paired off once again. Gil Thunder and Hauser are now learning to kind of adapt to each other's fighting style. They are paired together, and of course Gil Thunder is very by the book, very rigid, very fencing style. Here's strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, pose 4, pose 5, that kind of stuff. While Hauser is more of a goofball. He's more of an acrobatic sort of just rush in and brashly attack sort of mentality. Now they're fighting against this looks like a ground dragon or something. They refer to it as a ground lizard, and a rock dragon, I think. And so the lightning, of course, does not affect it, and the wind, it's too heavy for the wind to affect it. So I'm like, okay. So they're trying to teach them how to learn how to work together. Now, this is where they do learn. They kind of remember Meliodas teaching Gil, of course, said, look, you can't always be by the book. In battle, by the book doesn't always save you. You need to be able to be flexible and adapt and improvise depending on the situation. By the book will not always save you. If that were the case, no one would die in battle. If everyone read that book, and everyone learned that book, then how would anybody ever die? It doesn't work that way. War and battle does not work like that. And then when you see Dreyfus actually training Hauser, and Dreyfus says to Hauser, look, you're too much of a goofball. You slack off too much. You need to be a little more rigid. You need some form of formation. You need to at least understand the basics of swordsmanship, at the very least, at a fundamental level, before you can just goof off and brazenly attack with your sword. So now, this is where the two of them decide to, after butting heads for a bit, they decide to switch places sort of idea, and we see that Gil Thunder goes into kind of Hauser's brash stance, and Hauser goes into the more kendo swordsmanship, style of thing. It kind of reminds me of Kenpachi when he grabs it with two hands and kind of stands all rigid idea. Now, this, I don't know really why I like the idea that they're trying to show them how to be more flexible and how to adapt to each other's style, that there is no right or wrong answer. One of them is not more superior, but you being able to utilize both ways of combat is helpful. I don't understand how, by using these stances, by being more rigid, how Hauser couldn't have just, with his own style, have pinpointed accuracy the stick and blasted the dragon, and how the heavy armor of the Thunder Emperor couldn't have been used in the kendo style of form. I don't get it. I don't understand why these abilities, which were useful against this dragon, now they didn't actually win, I suppose, but why did they, I like the concept that they had to switch styles, but really that was a moot point. That really had nothing to do with the abilities they used. They just kind of sat and thought for a minute and went, well, let's try new abilities. You telling me they have to go into you're saying that Gil Thunder in his kendo very swordsman knightly style can't use the heavy armor of the Thunder Emperor? He has to go all brazen and, all right, let's do this, man. Yeah. He's got to act like Hauser for him to use that ability. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe I'm not reading enough into it. Guys, post in the comments below as to why I am so wrong about what went on there. But yeah, I like the concept. It just seemed to be a moot point as to how they ended up attacking the dragon. It would have been much more cool if the dragon had locked on with one eye to each one, and now that they kept switching styles. Gil Thunder would start with this style and then switch over to Hauser's one-handed, brash style, and the dragon got confused. That would have made more interest to me anyways. Now that being said, we see Hendrickson, of course, not being forgiven by King. Forgot to mention that, of course. Hendrickson has not been forgiven by King. Okay, that we knew that was going to happen. He doesn't forgive him for Helbram and all that stuff. Now we see Hendrickson looking on after those two succeed, and kind of I'm so glad that I didn't taint you in that regard. But Hendrickson was one of their teachers like Dreyfus, so I think that he just, in later years, he took more of a back role, and it was long before he was corrupted sort of idea, but he was glad that while he was under this corrupted state, he did not he did not sully his hands with them. They are still proper knights and stuff, and that's when we see Meliodas, absent Elizabeth and everybody, and Zenaria? Yeah, I think that's her name. We see him kind of go up to him and say, listen, I heard that you saved, the Three Stooges pretty much from an ash demon and stuff. You have my thanks, Hauser. You did a good job. And sorry, not Hauser, Hendrickson. And he says, well, of course I would save them. They're part of, I need to make amends here, and you got to feel bad for the guy. Him and Dreyfus, took on Fraudulent, and of course, they had no choice. That was an impossible situation, and Merlin and Meliodas were not aware, and they were not there to help them, or someone stronger than these two was there to help them. Now, we also go on to the fact that we see Gother and Arthur are doing their own trial and sort of semi-failing right now, and they're looking on like that. This is where King finally says, okay, I want to... I'll be a part of the training. You're right. My mood and my convenience will not affect my battle prowess. The Ten Commandments are attacking, and without this training, I'm still too weak. So let's try the training. So she tells him to go in with Hendrickson, and he goes, "Oh, are you kidding me? No, that is not the point. But you have to go in pairs." And that's when Meliodas says, "Oh, I'll go in with King." Okay, that's cool. And then King says to Meliodas, says, Captain, did you get your powers back? And he said, nope, but I should train my body before I do. So he's lying to him. He's lying to him right there, because we know he's got his powers back. Or I shouldn't say that. He doesn't actually, he's finished his trial, but his actual powers are not back as far as I'm aware yet. We have not seen him actually obtain his powers yet. So that might have been an accurate statement, but more of a fib, of a white lie rather than a blatant lie. Now, they go into their trial where they're supposed to choose a jewel and attack different monsters together. This is where, they have a conversation about Hendrickson, and this is where Meliodas tries to explain that Frodron was an impossible situation. Like, these two could not have done anything. The fact that Dreyfus managed to hold him back with his iron will for so long, and there wasn't more devastation prior to this, is actually rather good. Like, there was nothing they minimized as much problems as they could, but there was nothing the two of them could have done. You're asking too much. And he says, I'm not trying to wash away their sins or try to tell you have to forgive Hendrickson or Dreyfus for that matter. However, it's not their fault that this happened. And King brings up, so they were controlled, so they're a wash of sins. Is that I didn't say that, but you have to, Hendrickson right now is on our side trying to help us, and more strength is better. You got to get over this for right now. He can deal with his sins, as Hendrickson told him the same thing. I will pay for my sins later, but for right now is not the time. King is not accepting of this, and then he says, hey, Captain, who is Frodron and stuff? And he says, well, he's one of the 10 Commandments. That's why they couldn't resist him. He's not just some any demon. This is one of the most powerful demons. This is an elite class demon. What did you want them to do? And that's when he attacks Meliodas and says, Captain, you are really you're from the demon clan, aren't you? So the same idea. It's now, instead of Bond versus Meliodas, now it's King versus Meliodas, in a reminiscent of the fight from season 1, where Bond confronts Meliodas about being part of the demon clan. This is where it ends, actually, and I thought, okay, we're going to get a little more. I thought we'd jump back over to Bond eventually, but we don't. So episode 11, I'm assuming we're going to finish up the Bond half of this, and then we'll see the fight between Meliodas and King transpire. Gother and Arthur should come out of the training, I'm assuming. And where's Slater? Well, where is he? We haven't seen any training from him. What's he doing? Where's Griever? I'd like to see that, but we don't see any of that yet. So anyways, that being said, guys, that's basically the end of the anime episode review. That was episode 10. What did you guys all think? As I said, I kind of explained my thoughts as I went through, so there's no real final thoughts on the episode. It felt a little longer, maybe because the whole backstory, and they tried to explain the backstory all in one episode while still having some action with the current present time. I don't mind that, because now we can move on. We're all caught up. Now in the next episode, we have time to just move forward with both storylines rather than just get caught up with the past. We had a past thing with the flashback trial in episode 9. Now we had the Bond backstory in episode 10. Now episode 11, there's no real backstory to talk about. Now we can just move forward with the fights, the training, the storylines, just everything, which will be really, really good. I'm looking forward to episode 11. Right currently, as I'm recording this, I believe episode 12 has dropped. So hopefully I'll be able to get episode 11 and 12 out very, very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching and being patient with me. Appreciate all the feedback. Like, comment, subscribe, all the usual good stuff. Always appreciated. This has been Griever with your anime episode review of episode 10 of Nanatsu no Taizai's latest season. And we will see you back here next time, guys, for episode 11. Thanks so much. See you next time.